started into this because we were talking about the Chicago Burlington and Quincy and the Colorado and Southern, and how the Montana and Wyoming Coal really changed the whole complexion of that railroad and ultimately of the Burlington Northern. But then in 1990, they passed the Clean Air Act amendments. Now, the original Clean Air Act was signed by President Nixon in 1968, and that established some limits on air pollution. But in 1990, they tightened the limits on sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, and particulates. And that really pushed the Western coal, as we'll see. Because what they were looking at is, if you remember back in the 60s and the 70s, there was acid rain. And so near power plants and other things that oil refineries and stuff like that, you'd get this sulfur dioxide gets into the environment and creates a sulfate, which becomes sulfuric acid. Mild sulfuric acid will do this to trees. And if it's a little stronger, this is what it looks like. That wasn't a fire. That was acid rain. So they government said, no, we got to reduce the sulfur. So the utilities, first thing they did was they said, well, we've got this power plant. This is a typical power plant built in the 50s. A couple of metal stacks on the roof, and it used to put out, this stuff, so you'd have acid rain around close to the plant. Well, they said, let's put it way up in the air. And so, and the ultimate, of course, here was in Sudbury, Ontario. Craig, how tall is that stack up there? I
don't know. I remember it was a monster.
Yeah, over 1,000 feet or something like that.
I think so.
But the problem there is, instead of having the sulfur down here, now you have it 100 miles away or 200 miles away. So that didn't work very well. And so then the next thing they did is they said, well, let's put scrubbers on the power plants. And they burn the coal, and then they have some kind of collection system for the particulate, and then they'd run it through these tanks, and they would spray limestone and water mixed with water, and run the coal, the flue gas through that, and they could capture up to 90% of the sulfur. So it was pretty good. But unfortunately, as you see, instead of having this nice dry smoke coming out of the chimney, now you have this cold, wet. It's cleaner, but it's cold and wet. So they were buying a lot of paint jobs around the power plant, and so that didn't work very well. So then the utilities said, well, look at this subbituminous coal out here. This is really low in sulfur. We should try burning that.
The stack in Sudbury was 381 meters, which is 1,250 feet. It is the second highest in the world, second only to a power station in Kazakhstan.
Wow. 1,200. That's almost as tall as the CN Tower, right?
Oh, that's the height of the Empire State Building without the antenna on the roof.
Wow. That's a chimney. That is a chimney. Yeah. And if you've ever been to Sudbury, it sort of looks like the moon. I think it's better now. I'm sure the Canada's put on.
It's much better now.
Yeah, because it was interesting, because they burned coal, and then of course they had sulfur in their process for extracting nickel. So into the 70s, this is before the next Clean Air Act amendments, but anyway, they were burning this Western coal, 70s and 80s, and the Milwaukee was running it down to these plants in southern Wisconsin, and the BN was running it to plants here and in the Twin Cities and Chicago, and they were also, Detroit Edison built the Midwest Energy. You guys have probably seen that in Duluth, because the Detroit Edison plants on the power plants on the Detroit River were designed to get coal from lake boats coming from Ohio and Pennsylvania and places like that. Well, now they just bought bigger boats, and they 700 or 1,000 foot lake boats taking coal from Superior, Wisconsin down to Detroit Edison and other places like that. So now they're starting to haul a lot of Montana coal. Well, then the mining companies were looking at this big resource in the middle of Wyoming, And if you remember, the Burlington has these two lines they built to connect with the Northern Pacific and the Great Northern up here in near Billings. And so then the BN said, you know, we could build a line right here and we'd get right in the middle of all that wonderful Wyoming coal.
Ah, yeah.
So they applied. It's much lower sulfur, and it's lower cost. And so after the merger, the BN applied to the Interstate Commerce Commission to build the Oren line near the Wyoming coal, and the ICC approved it. 1976, but they said you have to have joint ownership with the CNW. They didn't want the one railroad to have it. They didn't want monopolies. The CN, unfortunately, or the CNW had to drop out because at the time they couldn't raise the money. So, so the BN built the Oren line, which is this red line right here, and it was 113 miles. And they started at the beginning they had all the permits and everything ready. So they started early in 1979 and they finished it later in the year. And so in the 1980s, this is what you saw all over the BN system: 3 SD40s or 3 or more C30-7s from General Electric, and hundreds of steel hopper cars hauling Wyoming and Montana coal. And so they were really doing it. So the Northwestern said, well, you know, we have this cowboy line. This is the cowboy line that they built west from it's Omaha, essentially Omaha, Council Bluffs area, across Nebraska and into Wyoming. And originally the Northwestern was going to build through South Pass, which is right here, and then go on up to Portland. Well, they never couldn't pull it together back in the 1870s. But anyway, they have this cowboy line, and they said, well, gee, we should rebuild this thing and haul coal. And so they did a study, and the problem with the line, the grades aren't bad, but it's curvy, lots of curves, you bet. And there are a lot of light bridges, so it's going to be like $400 or $500 million to do it. So they said, well, that's not going to work. So, well, then the Union Pacific said, well, we've got this old branch line that runs up through Scottsbluff. It's really light. It was light track. It was just a branch line. And they said, we could rebuild that, and you guys could build some track and connect with the Oren line, and we can start hauling coal. And so that's what they did. They connected into the Oren line, and then the UP rebuilt this line coming up here, and then they get on the main line there and haul it. And then it goes to the Northwestern and other railroads. But so that then with the UP, they were able to raise the money and buy it in. And so then the Northwestern was able to buy, with this coal traffic coming, they were able to buy General Electric locomotives. And first they bought Dash 840Cs. And then this came along, and this is a Dash 944 C, or the C44. And then General Electric came up with this high-tech paint scheme, they called it, for the Northwestern. But here's the Oren line, and these are some big, huge mines like Black Thunder, Antelope, North Antelope, and Rochelle, Coal Creek. These are huge mines that are up along here. And so then after the UP and the Northwestern merged in 1995, they continued to haul coal. And so here, for example, in the late 90s, we see a Northwestern General Electric C44 and a Union Pacific C44. And so then with aluminum cars. And the big thing that came along in the early 90s were the aluminum cars. Now, in the late 80s, I was at a coal conference down in Texas, and there were a couple of engineers that were talking about these aluminum cars. And then at the end, this guy gets up and he says, I'm from a steel car company. I don't think these things are going to last one season, and because we build them out of steel, which is strong, And well, it turns out that these things, the people building these cars were really smart. They did not do what the trucking companies did, which was to try to weld aluminum. That did not work well at all. And so these guys who are building these cars went and talked to the aircraft industry, and the aircraft industry says, well, you got to rivet it. And they taught them how to rivet it. And so they started riveting these cars together. And if you see a coal train, a lot of the utilities, the first two digits, it'll be usually a 4-digit number. And the first two digits are the year that it was built. And you'll still see a lot of cars, 90, 91, 92, built in the early 90s, and they're still running around. So the aluminum obviously was a really good thing, because not only can they haul 10% more coal on the way out, but the tare weight on the way back is 10% less. So that it saves a lot of fuel, and that's been really a good thing.